Good morning and welcome to Counterpoints. Ryan is on spring break, so we are very lucky to have Krystal joining us. And Krystal actually also has a little bit of an announcement about something that's going to be on the channel tonight. Krystal, how you doing and what have you got for us?
Doing good. Always a pleasure to be joining you on a Wednesday, Emily. Although it does deeply confuse me in terms of what day of the week it actually is.
Your rhythm
Small
is like
things
so off, yeah.
really throw me off, but I am very happy to be here. So thank you for reminding me. Sagar is actually moderating a debate tonight. It's via Zero Hedge, but it's going to be live streamed on our channel as well. The topic is Israel. Always, a light, easy breezy, no major disagreements there. And on one side, you're going to have Cenk Uygur and Dave Smith. On the other side, you're going to have Batya Ungar-Sargon and Dennis Prager. So I'm personally looking forward to tuning into that and seeing how it goes. But that'll be on our channel tonight at 7 p.m. So make sure you don't miss that. We got a lot, though, in the show to get to this morning. We've got major speaker drama. We've got new sanctions being announced against Iran. We've got a whole bunch of free speech issues we want to get to. Some very consequential SCOTUS oral arguments that happened yesterday that could be very significant for a lot of J6 defendants and also for Donald Trump himself. Looks like the DOJ is going to sue Live Nation. And Bill Maher making some interesting comments and also comes in the context of this whole NPR liberal, whatever's going on at NPR. You can help me understand that as well, Emily.
And Katie Couric is back talking to Bill Maher. Just so much going on.
Yeah, Katie Couric. That'd be a fun one for us to interview. We should try to get her. We should try to get her on. I have some questions for her.
That's a great idea. The only other thing I want to say before we dive in is that the debate that Sagar's moderating tonight sounds like a Stefan joke on Saturday Night Live. Like, it'll have everything. Dennis Prager, Sagar and Jetty. Heated conversations about
genocide.
Israel. Yes.
Yeah.
All right,
sounds like
7 p.m.
I was saying to you, it's such a weird world we inhabit. But this is what counts for, a good time in my book is tuning into this and seeing how it goes. But I know Sagar will do a fantastic job playing the, even-handed moderator there. So interesting to see the sparks fly.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure to tune in at 7 p.m. right here. Let's start, though, also just down the street with Congress here in Washington, D.C., where your weekly dose of Groundhog Day, yes, Mike Johnson might be ousted. Now Thomas Massie has joined Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate. They still need to do the parliamentary procedure of privileging the motion to vacate. If you want to get really nerdy, to actually force a vote on the motion to vacate the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, over his foreign aid package this time. Thomas Massie actually called on him to resign. We're going to break down all the details, but let's start with a clip of Mike Johnson talking to reporters yesterday in the Capitol. Here's what he had to say about the possibility of him resigning.
What is your response to Republicans who say this move should cost you your job and that if you don't resign, they will try to oust you?
I am not resigning, and it is, in my view, an absurd notion that someone would bring a vacate motion when we are simply here trying to do our jobs. It is not helpful to the cause. It is not helpful to the country. It does not help the House Republicans advance our agenda, which is in the best interest of the American people here, a secure border, sound governance. And it's not helpful to the unity that we have in the body.
All right, so again, that was Speaker Mike Johnson responding to push for him to actually just resign. And this came really from Thomas Massie. We can put Thomas Massie's tweet up on the screen. This is 8-2. He said, "I just told Mike Johnson in conference that I'm co-sponsoring the motion to vacate that was introduced by Marjorie Taylor Greene. He should pre-announce his resignation, as Boehner did, so we can pick a new speaker without ever being without a GOP speaker." Krystal, you might remember that reference to what John Boehner did as the writing kind of ended up on the wall with Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan all the way back in like 2015. That's what Thomas Massie is referencing there. And this all over a bill, the text of which actually has not yet been released, but Mike Johnson has signaled will include hefty aid to Ukraine, to Israel, to Taiwan, with none of the border security measures that his fellow Republicans, especially the sort of Freedom Caucus and Freedom Caucus adjacent people like Thomas Massie and like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was ousted from the Freedom Caucus, but we don't need to get into all of that, have demanded it be paired with border security or some other offsets. And they are furious with Mike Johnson for essentially working with Democrats who, as Politico has reported, seem to be open to potentially saving Mike Johnson from this motion to vacate in order to get their aid to Ukraine, their aid to Israel. This is A3, a tweet from Jake Sherman over at Punchbowl. He broke some of this down. He said House Republicans plan to try to pass 4 bills this week to send aid to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, according to 4 sources familiar with the plan. Maybe he had like 1 source per bill. The 4th bill will include a ban on TikTok, a bill to sell of seized Russian assets, a Lend-Lease Act for military aid, convertible loans for humanitarian relief, and other provisions. The GOP leadership will try to move this plan under one rule, the sources said. So 4 bills under one rule, and those are some of the details of what those bills might actually look like. And Krystal, I'll toss it to you, but let's first take this tweet from Matt Stoller, which is aimed actually at Democrats. He said, this move, is responding to Jake Sherman, will require Democratic support and is a move to create a de facto war party caucus that is beyond partisan reach. I hope Dems vote no. Mike Johnson has a 1-vote margin in the House of Representatives right now. So Stoller is absolutely correct that it will completely, no question about it, involve Democrats saving Mike Johnson to pass that bill. Stoller seems to me to be dead on, Krystal.
Yeah, I completely stand with Matt Stoller in his stance there. I do hate all 4 of these bills. I don't want any of them to pass. I could rank them in terms of which ones I hate the most, but the unconditional support for Israel probably reaches the top of the list, although, the banning TikTok stuff I also am opposed to. But just to explain the legislative machinations here and why someone like Thomas Massie, who I have plenty of disagreements with, but I consider to be a genuinely principled and actually courageous actor in the United States Congress, why I think he's correct to be very upset about this maneuver. So they've long been trying to push through more Ukraine aid, more Israel aid, more Taiwan aid, and we'll put the border security piece from the Republicans to the side for a moment. And it's been difficult because you've got Republicans who, some number of whom are opposed to Ukraine aid. You've got Democrats, some number of whom are now opposed to the Israel aid. And so, the thing that passed through the Senate, which pushed all these things together, was unlikely to pass through the House. So what Mike Johnson is doing is basically a sort of legislative trick where he's saying, okay, well, let's break these pieces apart. We have enough pro-war bipartisan consensus on Ukraine to pass just Ukraine through the House. We have enough pro-war bipartisan consensus on Israel to just pass Israel through the House. So if we do those 2 things and these other pieces separately, and then after the fact, combine them together so that it resembles basically what got through the Senate, then there you go. We get our uniparty, bipartisan, pro-war consensus funded all across the board. And so what Thomas Massie is saying is basically this is the polar opposite of what was promised to us when you were elected Speaker of the House. To be honest with you, Emily, some of the previous Speaker machinations back when it was Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz and whatever didn't really make a lot of sense to me and seemed to be more performative on the part of Matt Gaetz. Here, my understanding at least, was one of the key reasons that McCarthy was ousted in favor of Mike Johnson was Mike Johnson's supposed opposition to Ukraine aid. You also had the specter of him completely folding and reversing with regard to FISA and, the deep state and surveilling Americans. So I actually, to me, Thomas Massie's stand here makes sense, is entirely principled, and I'm certainly cheering for the whole thing to fail. I'm not all that hopeful that it's going to fail. But to Stoller's point, what he's referring to here is for these bills to even get to the floor, they have to pass this, the rules through committee. Typically, Democrats don't vote for Republican rules through those committees. That's sort of like the traditional way, but it would require Democrats in order to accomplish that. So that's why if Democrats decided they wanted to block this, they could. It doesn't seem to me entirely likely that that is going to happen, though, at this point. It seems like, once again, we're on track, very likely, for the pro-war consensus to get their money, as they seem to always be able to accomplish.
And to that point, actually, the House Intelligence Committee put out a statement yesterday, a joint statement from Chairman Mike Turner. Obviously was a huge it was just on his victory lap over the FISA win that the Uniparty had last week. But they put out a joint statement, Mike Turner and the ranking member, Jim Himes, a Democrat, and said, we must pass Ukraine aid now. Today, in a classified briefing, where have you heard that before, our committee was informed of the critical need to provide Ukraine military aid this week. No specifics, of course. That's just how they like to frame these things. The U.S. must stand against Putin's war of aggression now, as Ukraine's situation on the ground is critical. So Mike Johnson actually is allowing the Uniparty to attach Ukraine aid to Israel aid, knowing that a lot of Republicans who are opposed to Ukraine aid at this point support Israel aid. That was a red line for many of these people that said this is the ultimate betrayal. We don't know exactly what we expected from you, Mike Johnson, but we heard you say many, many times that you opposed tying Ukraine aid to Israel aid, that you oppose continuing to fund the war in Ukraine without funding American border security. So it just feels like a big stab in the back and to those members. And on top of that, now there is this real, I think, principled backlash from people like Thomas Massie. I couldn't agree more with you, Krystal, that he is courageous and genuinely is committed to the principles on this question to prevent from happening exactly what Stoller is predicting. And I feel like, Krystal, that is it's something that if I had to bet, I would probably say won't happen because the politics of it for Democrats are so difficult right now. But then again, the margin here is so small that it wouldn't take that many Democrats to break away if you have Jim Himes already putting out a statement like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's unfortunately been my view from the beginning that some way, somehow, they were going to push through their Ukraine money. They were going to push through their Israel money because they always do. Mm-hmm. So whether it's through this particular legislative maneuver or the next one, it seems like somehow they always find some way to get this type of money through. And it's almost a cliche at this point. Like, there isn't all this legislative maneuvering and pressure and repeated attempts to get the minimum wage lifted or to get healthcare to more Americans or to get, affordable childcare or any other number of things that would benefit us. But when it comes to making sure that their donors, plenty of whom come from the defense industry, are going to get paid, or their future jobs in the defense industry are going to be locked up, or, that AIPAC is satisfied with their return on investment for their donations. When it comes to those things, they figure out some way. And even people who, like Mike Johnson, who claim to be opposed to some of these things, suddenly when the pressure's on, he flips on a dime and he's right there standing alongside, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden and all of the worst war hawks in the entire country. So you actually think, though, that there's a chance that these things will fail because of the consternation on the Republican and the Democratic side this time?
Yeah, I wonder because we haven't totally seen the pressure campaign ratchet up on Democrats yet. Does it look for Democrats, especially on the House side where a lot of them are up for re-election, like they're saving a Republican speaker? Do they worry about that? I don't know. I think those dynamics are what people are thinking about over at the D-Trip and the DNC today, and we might see we might get like spidey senses as to where they're pushing people as this continues on. But there is reporting that they've talked about being open to doing it. That was even rumored back when it was McCarthy on the chopping block. So who knows how real it is, if it's just a tool to keep having these conversations. But to put a fine point on what you just said, Krystal, about Mike Johnson, it's like he said he went into the SCIF where you get those confidential briefings and of classified information, and on Section 702 FISA reform last week said he wanted to prevent another 9/11. From what he heard in the SCIF, that's what he was really worried about. And it was actually a joke in some sort of like Freedom Caucus-y circles before that, that Mike Johnson would go to the SCIF and completely flip-flop on FISA, and that's exactly what happened. And it's funny because that's the language that Mike Turner and Jim Himes used in that joint statement, that we got a classified briefing today about the urgency for passing Ukraine aid this week. I mean, it is always the same thing, and that FISA reform is now looking to be an even worse bill that within, just a couple of days between when everyone saw it, when it was passed, that it already looked like. So you're right. I mean, they always, for the most part, get what they want, and the rest of us just have to sit back and take it.
Well, and that tactic is so incredibly typical. Like, oh, well, there's something really scary that we can't tell you about, but I promise you it justifies completely trampling on your constitutional rights. Yet again, just trust us. Why should we trust you? And remember when we were originally beginning to talk about this FISA reform, remember they leaked to the press about these Russian space nukes?
Yes.
Yeah, like that was the, we've got to find the scariest thing we can possibly sell to the American people about why we are, taking away their right to privacy here and going to continue surveilling them without a warrant. So, yeah, it's a classic tactic to use fear. Frankly, it works all too often. But at this point, there is at least some bipartisan skepticism of the, surveillance state. And so there's a little bit more of a roadblock to just, rolling everybody with their Russian space nuke fear-mongering or whatever else they're going to roll out. But it's a classic tactic, and it has worked plenty of times. And ultimately, they do all kinds of things that don't really have the backing of the American people. They find a way. And I think this latest gambit, which weaponizes the fact that there's so much support for, just constantly unconditional support for Israel, sufficient amounts amongst both the parties and sufficient amounts to continue the Ukraine war indefinitely, in spite of the fact that there's no real plan at this point. I genuinely don't know what the plan is at this point to help secure victory for the Ukrainians. It seems like we're just going to kick the can down the road. Ryan made a comment that I thought was really important, which is, we've covered the fact that the Ukrainians are struggling to find people to fight this war, are pulling men off the street, including men who are disabled, physically and mentally disabled, to send to the front lines. And we're using our tax dollars to put guns in the hands of people who have no desire to fight. I mean, it's frankly unconscionable and immoral at this point, especially with no plan of what's going to happen. So in any case, it's a disgusting consensus that exists in Washington, and I figured at some point they would come up with the legislative mechanism to get their way and to fulfill the fondest wishes of all the folks who live inside the Beltway who make millions off of continuing these conflicts.
And just to end on a pessimistic note, actually, I think, the consensus is building against the Uniparty, and we saw that in Mike Johnson himself, someone who was friendly with Republican leadership. He wasn't in the Freedom Caucus. He wasn't sort of on the fringes. He was against the FISA reform at first. He was against he was against Ukraine without border spending, and changed on that. And that's where I think it is really there's plenty of room for pessimism, because if even somebody like him, who, was sort of against all of these obvious uniparty priorities, gets into office, there's no question he's in a really difficult spot. I mean, I think big picture, it's clear that ousting Kevin McCarthy, while I have no tears for Kevin McCarthy, was tactically an error. We don't have to roll the clip, but Kevin McCarthy basically said recently that he's not speaker right now because of Matt Gaetz, and McCarthy was way more sympathetic in style to that sort of wing of his party that he needs to get these bills across than Mike Johnson is. And Mike Johnson is friends with those guys. So it just feels to them like a slap in the face. And I think they're right to have that feeling, because he's someone who understood them, who spent time with them, who said the right things to them. And again, he's in a difficult spot. He's got a 1-vote margin. He doesn't have George Santos anymore. That's a real tragedy for him. But the math is tough. And their perspective on that is, well, the math is tough, so don't cave to the Uniparty. You don't have to. And I think that argument is obviously correct, but we'll see what happens. We actually don't even have the text of this bill yet, again, so that'll drop at some point this week. It could really happen at any time, but I don't know that they'll even try to bring these bills to the floor as they plan to now until later this week and maybe in early next week, but we could be looking at billions more to Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan. We could also be looking at, even if after they passed that, they could oust Mike Johnson. So could be some really big changes to foreign policy and Congress in the days ahead, Krystal.
Yeah, and the last two things I'll say about this is I just want to note once again the way that Trump has also completely flipped in the way he's talking about Ukraine is, now embrace this idea, oh, we're going to give them a loan. It's not really just a blank check. It's actually a loan. Of course, we would never, it's the same thing, right? We would never see that money against a preposterous notion, and he can't be stupid enough to think otherwise. So there's that. The other thing, just with regard to the philosophy of Mike Johnson, and this was why I was always skeptical of him in this position, apart from other major ideological differences I have, but of course I'm going to have those with any Republican at this point. He is a true believer when it comes to Zionism and when it comes to Israel. And it comes from this religious, evangelical place. So I can't even say it's like the money or the corruption. Like, I think he is a fervent believer in we got to support Israel no matter what they do, no matter what the cost, no matter how many people are killed. And so the minute you have that on someone, then it's basically, all right, well, if you want so badly to ship that aid to Israel, what are you going to be able to do for us on these other pieces in terms of Ukraine? And so I think that for him is a big part of the reason why he flipped so quickly on some of these items.
Yeah, I mean, after October 7th, the cause for Ukraine with voters became, maybe even, it may have actually hurt how voters feel towards Ukraine because of exactly the dynamics you just outlined, Krystal.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.